The night was heavy with silence, the kind that presses on the chest and makes even breathing feel like an intrusion. A single lantern swayed at the far end of the room, its faint light flickering across the walls as if afraid of the darkness it was meant to push away. On the narrow bed, a man lay still, his chest rising and falling with painful effort. Every breath he took sounded like a war he was losing, every exhale a whisper that the end was near. By his side knelt his closest friend, gripping his trembling hand as if by holding tighter he could anchor him to life. "You can't go yet." The friend's voice broke, though he tried to sound strong. "You still have battles to fight. You still have a life waiting for you outside these walls." The dying man smiled faintly, a shadow of who he once was. His lips were cracked, his skin pale, but in his fading eyes there was still fire fragile, wavering but determined to leave behind something more than silence. With a strength no one could explain, he pulled his friend closer, his voice barely above a breath. "Promise me something." "Not for me, but for her." The friend frowned, his heart pounding. He knew what "her" meant. He knew the weight of that unspoken name, the scarred woman, the one the world avoided, whispered about, judged without mercy, the one who had lived in shadows because society would not let her step into the light. "She's alone." The dying man forced the words out, his voice shuddering. "Everyone looks away when she walks by, but she's more than her scars. You know it. I know it. She deserves a love that doesn't flinch, a home that doesn't push her out." He coughed, pain ripping through his chest. Still, he clung to the strength of his final request. The friend shook his head, tears burning his eyes. "You're asking me. I'm asking you to swear." "On my last breath," the dying man interrupted, his voice trembling with urgency. "Swear to me you'll marry her. Swear you'll give her the life no one else dares to offer. Promise me you'll see her, not the scars." The room seemed to collapse into silence. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters as though the world itself was holding its breath. The friend's heart felt like it would shatter. His throat tightened, torn between fear, duty, and the weight of loyalty that could not be broken. He squeezed his friend's frail hand harder, as if that pressure could stop death itself. "I swear," he whispered finally, his words heavy, sinking deep into the room. "On your last breath, I swear." And as those words left his lips, the dying man smiled one last time. His chest rose, fell, and still the lantern flickered. The air grew heavier, and in that silence, the promise bound itself to the living like chains of fire no heart could escape. The friend sat frozen, hand still wrapped around one that had already grown cold. His mind replayed the vow he had just spoken, every syllable, burning into his conscience. He had promised his life away not for glory, not for fortune, but for a woman who carried scars the world saw as curses. A woman he had never dared to approach beyond fleeting glances and unspoken guilt. A woman who had been reduced to whispers, turned into a ghost while still alive. The vow was no longer words, it was law. It was a destiny sealed in the shadow of death. Days passed, but the weight of that night never lifted. Everywhere he went, the vow followed him. It echoed in the clink of a glass, in the silence of midnight, in the wind brushing against the trees. The world moved on, as it always does after loss, but he could not. Every face he saw reminded him of the one he had lost and the one who still lived, hidden away, carrying wounds both visible and unseen. When at last he found himself standing at her door, his hand trembling before he could even knock, he felt the full force of what he had sworn. This was not a path he would have chosen. This was not a life he had ever imagined. But it was the one he owed. Inside, she sat in silence, staring at the fire that gave little warmth. Her scars caught the glow, marking her face and arms with lines of a past she never spoke of. People said she was cursed. Some said her scars were punishment for sins not her own. Children whispered and ran when she walked past. Men looked at her once, then looked away forever. She was alive, but the world had buried her long ago. And now, outside her door, stood a man who had sworn on his friend's last breath to bind his life to hers. His knuckles grazed the wood. His heart thundered in his chest. This was the moment where promises turned to reality, where words spoken in grief demanded flesh, blood, and choice. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that the woman inside was not waiting to be rescued. She was not waiting for pity disguised as love. Her scars told a story far darker, far deeper than anyone dared to imagine. And binding himself to her would not just honor a vow. It would drag him into a storm that would test every bone, every belief, every breath he had left. Because loving her would not only defy the world, it would demand a price far greater than he could yet see. The door creaked under his touch. His lips parted as though to call out her name. But before he could, a voice inside whispered not to him, but to the fire, "No one keeps their promises, not to me." And as his hand finally knocked, the sound echoing like thunder through the night, the story truly began. The first knock sounded too soft, as if the door itself did not want to wake the house. The second was clearer, a steady sound that traveled down the narrow hall and reached the fire where she sat. She flinched. For a moment she looked toward the latch, then at her hands, then back to the fire. The scar along her jaw caught the light again, turning a dull silver. Her breath trembled, like a leaf clinging to a branch in wind that would not stop. He stood on the step, palm flat against the wood, trying to steady his own breathing. The promise he had made felt like a weight hanging from his ribs. He could still hear the whisper from that dim room, "Swear on my last breath." It wrapped around his thoughts and would not let go. He was not a hero, not the kind who rides in with grand words and easy plans. He was only a man who loved his friend and could not break a vow. The latch lifted with a thin click. The door opened halfway, as if the house itself could choose how much of the world to let in. She stood in the gap, shoulders tilted to hide one side of her face. It was a habit long practiced. He noticed it and tried not to notice it at the same time. The air between them felt like a question no one could answer. "Good evening," he said. His voice came out rougher than he meant. She nodded, wary. This late, most people send words through someone else. Her tone was plain, neither warm nor cold. It held the dryness of a place where rain had not fallen for years. "I came myself," he said. He didn't want to say why. Not yet. He needed a breath, a bit of ground that didn't tilt under him. She studied him like a person reading a map they did not trust. "I know who you are," she said at last. "You were with him." At the end, the hallway seemed to shrink. He felt the room with the lantern again, the stillness after that final breath. He swallowed. "I was." Something flickered in her eyes, not tears exactly, but the ache that lives beside them. "People stop by when they want to tell me how sorry they are," she said. "They bring soup, they bring advice. Then they leave before the pot goes cold." "I didn't bring soup," he said softly. "Then why are you here?" The truth pressed at him. He could hear the words and yet feared them. "He asked me to come," he said. "He asked me to make sure you weren't alone." At that, her mouth hardened. "No one can make sure of that. People say they'll stand by me. They last a day, sometimes 3. He asked me for more than that." The words felt like a step off a cliff. She waited. The fire snapped behind her, the noise too loud in the quiet. "He asked me to marry you," he said, the vow landing in the small space between them. He did not dress it up. He could not. "He asked me to swear on his last breath." She did not move. For a long moment she said nothing at all, and he could hear the wind outside touch the eaves and move on. When she finally spoke, her voice was very calm. "He asked you that?" "Yes." "Because he thought it would save me?" "Because he believed you deserve more than shadows," he said. "He said you are more than your scars. He said you're strong. He said I should see you." She opened the door a little wider but did not invite him in. "People like to make vows when someone is dying," she said. "It makes their own fear feel useful." She tilted her head. "Did you love him?" "I did." "Then you will understand why I will not let grief turn me into charity." Her words were not cruel. They were careful. "If you came because you pity me, go home. If you came because you are afraid to break a promise, go home." Pity and fear. "Do not make a marriage. I didn't come for pity," he said. "I came because he trusted me with something he could not carry himself anymore, because I gave my word, because I want to do right by both of you." Her gaze drifted past his shoulder to the empty road. "Right by both of us," she repeated, as if testing whether the phrase could stand. "That is a heavy road. I know." She looked at his hands, perhaps to see if they shook. "Do you know the story they tell about me?" she asked. "The one people trade over fences and market stalls like a rumor is a kind of coin?" He did. Even those who tried not to listen had heard it. He had heard many versions. In one, a storm took the roof while her family slept, lightning splitting the world, fire moving like a living thing. In another, a lamp tipped during a lake. Chore and flames ran wild before help arrived. In the cruelest version, no accident was needed. The whispers said the house had been marked because she had been marked. He had hated that version most of all. He had never known what was true. "I know some of what they say," he answered. "They prefer the version that keeps their own doors safe," she said. "It helps them sleep. It keeps them from asking where a spark began and who fed it without meaning to." He looked at the floorboards. She stepped back a little, and the room behind her came into view. The house was small. There was a table with a threadbare runner, a chipped cup near the edge, a pot on the hearth. A narrow shelf held a few books and a small box with a simple clasp. On the wall hung a faded ribbon with no explanation. It was a plain room, but it felt cleaner than any place had a right to be. Everything had its place, a quiet order that a person builds when chaos has taken too much. "Come in," she said at last. "Not because of your vow. Because I want to hear what he told you about me. And because I want you to hear what he never told you." He stepped inside. The warmth of the fire brushed his knees. She closed the door and did not lock it, which he noticed for no reason he could name. He stood by the table. She did not ask him to sit. She took the small box from the shelf, set it on the runner, and opened the clasp. Inside were letters, each folded with care, the folds worn soft at the corners. He recognized the slanted writing on the top one. It was his friend's hand. "You and he shared many things," she said. "You shared work. You shared secrets, I imagine. He kept safe parts of you that other people did not see. He did the same for me." She touched the edges of the letters the way a person touches the edge of a lake before wading in. "We were not lovers," she said, meeting his eyes so there could be no misunderstanding. "The town thinks every bond must be either scandal or pity. But we were more simple and more complicated than that." He didn't speak. He didn't want to crush the meaning with questions too soon. "He brought me news," she went on. "He brought me books. Sometimes he brought me silence, which is a gift when most people can only bring noise. He told me once that if life broke in half, he would hold one side and I would hold the other so it wouldn't fall to the ground." She lifted the top letter and set it aside without opening it. "He never promised marriage. He knew I would not take it from him, and he knew he could not give it. He had his own unhealed places. The fire popped. He could smell ash and tea, and something else, maybe time crushed under a hand. Outside, a dog barked far away, the sound thin and tired. He asked me for one favor, she said. He asked me to forgive him for a truth he would not speak. What truth? She gave a small, sad smile. If I tell you now, you will think. The story is over. It is not. She set the small box closer to him. There is a letter for you. He left it with me. He said I would know when to pass it on. His throat tightened. He reached for the box, hesitated, then picked up a sheet that bore his name. The paper felt lighter than it should, like a leaf you expect to be wet and find dry. Before he could unfold it, she said, "Understand this. Marriage is not a shelter you build out of fear. It cannot be some wall you stand behind while people throw stones at me. If we even speak of it again, it will be because both of us see the same horizon. Not because you were pushed toward my door." He nodded. "I hear you." "Good," she said, and the word, simple as it was, felt like a test passed. "Now read." He opened the letter. His friend's hand spoke from a place that was both close and far, a voice on paper that made the room sway. The first lines were gentle, the way a person will walk on old boards. Memories of shared nights, jokes half finished, hope held between them like a stubborn coal that refused to die. Then the ink darkened into something harder. He read about the day of the fire, but not like in the stories. He read about a mistake not meant to harm, a repair done in haste, a wire that should have been replaced and wasn't. He read about fear and silence, and the way guilt can build a second house inside a person and make it their only home. He read his own name in a sentence that shook his bones, not with blame, but with a plea. Take care of what I could not fix. Do what I could not do. Do not let her bear what was never hers to carry alone. He had to stop and steady his hands on the table. The room seemed to tilt again, as if the floor had shifted to a steeper angle. She watched him without stepping closer. She had the steady way of someone who has sat with storms and learned not to flinch at the first thunder. "Do you see now why pity would be poison?" she asked quietly. "Why a promise made for its own sake could not hold? There are truths that will pull a vow apart if it is not made of the right things." "I see," he managed. "He wanted you to come," she said. "But he also wanted you to choose. He wanted you to face the part of the story you were never told." She looked toward the window, where the night pressed its face against the glass. "The town will not welcome any union between us. They will call it madness, a marriage built on a grave. They will say you are the next person I will ruin, because that is how they keep from looking at their own ruins." She breathed in slowly. "If you step toward this, it cannot be to rescue me. I am not a house on fire anymore." He lowered the letter. He felt both hollow and crowded at once. The words inside him were all edges. "What do you want?" he asked, because anything else felt like talking in a circle. "I want to be seen," she said. "Not as a lesson, not as a test, not as a debt to be paid for another man. If there is a marriage, it must be because you see me and I see you, and we both choose it in the light." She paused. "And I want to tell you the part he could not write, because ink cannot hold everything." He waited. "People think scars make a person only one thing," she said. "They forget that scars are evidence that something has healed." She lifted the ribbon from the wall. On the other side, sewn with small stitches, there was a date. "This was the day I walked through the market and no one recognized me," she said. "Not because I hid my face, because I stopped looking at the ground. That was the day I decided I would not be the town's shadow." The date was 2 years after the fire. He tried to imagine those 2 years, counted not by seasons but by steps taken and steps not taken. "There is more," she said, voice barely above the fire. "The night of the flames, I was not alone. and the person who was with me has never spoken. The room changed. Even the kettle seemed to pause. Who? He asked. The word felt thin. She did not answer. Instead, she moved to the window and peered through a small gap in the curtain. Someone has been standing across the lane, she said. They come when the light fades, then leave before anyone else notices. I thought. It was only my nerves at first. But it has been 3 nights now. He stepped beside her and looked out. At first he saw only dark, and then there, near the leaning post, he caught the shape of a figure, still as a stone, watching the house. When the figure sensed he was seen, it turned and dissolved into the side street like mist slipping under. A door. He felt the letter in his pocket like a live thing. He felt the old vow and the new truth pressing on him from both sides. Do you know who it is? He asked. Yes, she said, and no. Her hand touched the ribbon again, then a box of letters, as if to remind herself what was real. If you come back tomorrow, I will tell you what he did not write and what I have not dared to say. But understand me, after that, there will be no going back to your old life the way it was. Not if you are a man who keeps promises. He thought of the grave, the lantern, the last breath. He thought of the small, stubborn way hope keeps trying to live. He thought of the shadow by the post and the story the town told, and the story the letter had started to tell instead. I will come back, he said. She nodded, as if that was the only answer she expected. She walked him to the door, but did not reach for the latch at once. Bring nothing, she said. Not even flowers. Bring only the truth you can carry without folding. Then she opened the door to the night. The road lay quiet, the sky deeper than ink, the air thin with cold. He stepped onto the porch. Behind him, the fire breathed in the little house, and in front of him, the dark breathed out. The door closed softly, as if not to wake the things that sleep in old wood. He stood for a long time with the letter in his pocket and the image of the watching figure stitched into his mind like a secret word on the back of a ribbon. When he finally turned to go, the wind moved through the trees along the lane and made a sound like pages turning. Somewhere far off, a bell struck the hour, and in that measured sound he felt the shape of what tomorrow might demand. He started down the road, each step small and steady, knowing that the promise he carried had grown into something larger than duty, and that the truth waiting behind that door would either bind them or break them in ways the town had no words for yet. Halfway to the corner, he looked back. The window showed a faint room of light. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw a second shadow cross behind the curtain, not hers, not his, and then it was gone, leaving only the flicker of the fire and the whisper of unanswered questions. The night did not rest easily with him. When he finally returned to his own house, the silence pressed in as though the walls themselves wanted answers he could not give. The letter still weighed heavy in his pocket, but it was not only the words that haunted him. It was her eyes when she spoke of scars, her calm when she spoke of promises, and the shadow he had seen across the lane. The world around him had grown darker, not because the lamps had dimmed, but because new questions had been lit and none of them carried clear light. He sat at his table, spreading the letter out before him again. The ink looked almost alive, sharp in places where his friend's hand had pressed hard, faint in others where weakness had slowed the pen. Each line told not only what was written, but the weight under it, the guilt, the fear, the silent confession of a man who had carried something too long. He wondered how long she had been carrying her own silence, and how much of it was tied to the truth his friend had begged him to face. Sleep did not come. When at last his eyes closed, his dreams filled with fire. He saw the old house collapsing in flame, walls glowing like embers, and through the smoke he saw 2 figures standing side by side. One was his friend, eyes pleading. The other was her, holding something hidden in her hands, something she refused to let burn. He woke gasping, the smell of smoke lingering in his mind though his house was cold. The next day, whispers filled the town. At the baker's shop, two women lowered their voices when he entered. At the smithy, a man avoided his eyes. Word traveled faster than footsteps here, and already people were guessing why he had been seen walking to her house. Some said he was delivering debt money. Others said he was caught by her curse, the way foolish men always are in stories told by those who don't know the truth. A boy in the street even asked him if he had touched her hand, as though touching would spread marks like disease. He said nothing, but inside his chest a fire burned hotter than any forge. What unsettled him most was not the gossip, but the way. Some people glanced at him with pity, as if they thought they already knew how his story would end. The town had already chosen its narrative. He was the next fool walking toward ruin. He clenched his jaw and kept moving, though inside, doubt twisted its roots deeper. When evening came, he returned to her house. The same lantern light flickered behind the curtain, steady as a heartbeat. He raised his hand to knock, but before his knuckles touched wood, the door opened. She stood there, not surprised to see him. "You came back," she said simply. "I said I would." She stepped aside. He entered, and again the warmth of the fire wrapped around him. This time, however, something else was waiting in the air, tension, sharper than the night before. On the table, a second cup was set beside hers, as though she had been expecting conversation that would not be easy. "I told you," she said, taking her seat by the fire, "that the night of the flames I was not alone." He sat across from her, waiting. The one who stood with me was not family, not a stranger either. It was someone the town would never suspect. She paused, her gaze steady, unflinching. "It was your friend." The words struck like stone against glass. "He?" Leaned back, breath sharp. "He was there?" "Yes," she said. "He was there before the fire started. He was with me when it spread. And when the roof cracked and the smoke filled the air, he pulled me out. My scars are proof of that night." His silence was proof of something else. He thought of the letter, the unspoken truth it hinted at. Why didn't he ever tell me? "Because guilt lives quieter than courage," she said. "And because he feared what would happen if people knew he was in that house with me when the fire began. They would have blamed him for being there at all. They would have blamed both of us for reasons that had nothing to do with flame or wood." He could hear the town's whispers already, ugly and sharp. They would have taken the pieces of that story and twisted them into something unrecognizable. "He asked you to marry me," she continued. "Do you see now why? It was not only for me, it was for himself." His last breath carried not only love for a friend, but guilt for a truth he could never let out. The room seemed smaller, as though the walls had leaned in to hear. He tried to speak, but the words knotted in his throat. "There is more," she said. "The shadow outside last night, it is not random. It is tied to the fire too. Someone else knows the truth, or at least enough of it to come watching." "Who?" he asked. Her gaze flickered toward the window again. "It could be the one who saw us that night, or the one who caused it. But whoever it is, they have waited years to step into the dark again. And now that you are here, the pieces have begun to move." He pressed his hands together, the letter still folded in his coat pocket. "Why tell me now?" "Because your vow brought you into this circle," she said softly. "And once inside, there is no standing still. Either you walk forward, or the past will swallow you." The fire snapped again, and in the silence that followed, he thought he heard footsteps outside. He rose quickly, crossing to the window, but when he looked out, the lane was empty. Still, the air felt disturbed, like water after a stone had been thrown. When he turned back, she was watching him carefully. "Do you believe me?" she asked. He nodded slowly. I believe you." Her shoulders eased, but only slightly. "Then you must be ready. The town will not stay quiet. The person in the shadows will not stay hidden. And your vow," she stopped, voice faltering for the first time, "your vow may lead you into more than you were ever meant to carry." He thought of the promises made in dying rooms, of scars carried in silence, of the watchful figure that vanished into the dark. He thought of the way her words did not tremble, even when they cut. "I'll carry it," he said finally, "even if it breaks me." Her eyes softened, but the firelight caught them like steel. "We'll see," she whispered. That night, when he left her house again, the road seemed even longer. He kept glancing at the corners, half expecting that shadow to appear again. But the lane was empty, only the sound of the wind chasing leaves across the dirt. Still, the feeling of being followed never left him, as though unseen eyes tracked each of his steps. What neither of them knew was that the shadow was not only a person, but a secret bound tightly to the night of the fire. And as the days passed, it would not remain in hiding. It would step closer until promises, scars, and lies collided in ways none of them could escape. The vow was no longer a chain, it was a door. And once opened, it could not be closed. The days that followed pressed heavier on him than any weight he had carried before. Every morning the street seemed sharper with whispers, every corner filled with eyes that turned away too late. His name now slipped into the same sentences as hers, sometimes with pity, more often with scorn. He could feel the story the town was weaving, and it wrapped around him like a net threads of gossip that no knife could cut. Yet it wasn't the townspeople that made his chest tighten each night. It was the figure in the shadows. Each evening, as he left her door, he felt the same gaze pulling at him from somewhere unseen. Sometimes he caught movement at the edge of the road, sometimes only the sound of a footstep too quickly swallowed by silence. Once, he was sure he saw a glint of eyes watching from behind the broken fence near the mill. Whoever it was, they were waiting. Waiting for him to make the wrong move, waiting for her to slip into the open, waiting for something only they understood, inside. Her house, the tension grew thicker too. She spoke more about the fire, her words piecing together memories like broken glass. She told him about the way the smoke had filled her lungs, how the heat had burned before the flames ever touched skin. She told him of his friend's hands pulling her out, rough and shaking, leaving her with breath but also with scars she had never asked to carry. And then she told him the part she had never spoken to anyone, that when she opened her eyes outside. That night, there was another figure standing just beyond the firelight. Someone who had not tried to help. Someone who had only watched. "That was the same shape I saw at the post," she whispered, her voice steady but low. "All these years I thought maybe my mind had made it, but now—" She shook her head. "Now I know." He wanted to ask who it was, but she did not give a name. Perhaps she did not know it, or perhaps she feared speaking it would bring the figure closer. Either way, silence filled the space between them, heavy with things unsaid. One evening, when the wind carried the smell of rain, he walked her home from the well. The road was empty, the houses shuttered, the world preparing for the storm. Yet, halfway down the lane, the sound of footsteps joined theirs, echoing just behind. He turned sharply, but the path was bare. Only when they reached her door and the lantern was lit did he see it, a mark carved into the wood of the frame. It was small, almost hidden in the grain, but deliberate. "What is it?" she asked, seeing his face pale. "A sign," he said, tracing it with his finger. It was a symbol, crude but familiar, the same mark once scrawled on the old house before the fire. He had seen it then and thought little of it, but now, years later, it had returned, cut fresh into the wood of her home. Her breath caught. "Then it wasn't an accident," she whispered. "The storm broke that night. wind battering the shutters, rain lashing against the roof. Inside, the fire struggled against the draft, the flames bending low. He stayed by the door, listening, certain the storm was only a cover for something else. Every crash of thunder felt like footsteps drawing nearer, every flicker of lightning like a signal flashing in the dark. When the storm calmed at last, he opened the door and stepped into the wet night. The lane shimmered with puddles, but at the far end, near the crook post, a figure stood again. This time, they did not turn away. They remained, still and silent, as though daring him to step closer. His hand tightened at his side, but before he could move, the figure raised an arm slowly, pointing not at him but at her window. Then, without a sound, they slipped into the trees and vanished. He returned inside, dripping with rain. She was waiting, her face pale in the dim light. He told her what he had seen, and though she said nothing at first, he could see her lips pressed tight, as if holding back words too dangerous to let loose. Finally, she spoke. "It is the same person. I am sure of it now. And if they point at me, it means they want me to remember." "Remember what?" She looked at the fire, her eyes distant. "The part of the night I've never dared to tell anyone. The thing that kept me silent while the town wrote its stories. That figure in the trees. I saw their face before the flames swallowed the house. I knew them." He stepped closer, his chest tight. "Who?" But she did not answer. She only closed her eyes, as though the memory was too sharp to name. The fire cracked, shadows shifting across her scarred skin. And in that moment he understood, whatever truth she held back was more dangerous than the gossip of the town, more dangerous than the vow he had spoken. It was the key to the fire itself, the secret that tied his friend's guilt, her silence, and the shadow in the lane into one burning thread. The next day the town grew restless. People whispered of strange marks found on doors, of shadows moving at the edges of the fields. Some claimed the scarred woman had brought it, that curses never rest. Others muttered that someone was stirring old ashes, dragging the past into the present. Either way, suspicion spread like smoke. And in the center of it all stood the vow, binding him tighter each hour, pulling him into a storm that no promise could keep at bay. That night, he returned to her door again, but before he could knock, he heard voices inside, her voice and another. Deep, rough, urgent. He froze, listening. The words were muffled, but the tone was sharp, edged with warning. He leaned closer, catching only fragments. "You should have stayed quiet. They'll know soon." It was never meant to. Then the voice dropped, too low to hear. His heart pounded. He stepped back just as the door opened, and a man slipped past him into the dark. He caught only a glimpse of the man's face, lined and tense, before the figure disappeared into the lane. When he turned back, she was standing in the doorway, her hands shaking. "Who was that?" he demanded. Her lips parted, but no sound came. The silence that followed was heavier than any answer. And in that silence, the story reached its sharpest edge, the point where truths threatened to tear open, where promises tangled with secrets, and where the fire from years ago seemed ready to blaze again, not in wood and smoke this time, but in the lives of those still bound to it. The climax was coming, closer with every step of the shadow, with every whisper in the town, with every secret she dared not speak. And once it broke, nothing would remain untouched. He stood in the doorway. The night pressed tight around them, and the breath between them felt like a thread that could snap. The man who had slipped past into the lane was already gone, boots fading into rain-soft dirt. Inside, the fire hovered low, as if it knew too much to flare. He waited for her to speak, but for a long moment she only held the edge of the table, knuckles light, steadying herself like a sailor on a moving deck. "He was here to warn me," she said at last, "or to frighten me. He said the past is Better asleep. He said the town needs its story more than it needs the truth. Who is he to decide that? He asked, anger rising, not loud but deep. The caretaker at the old mill, she said. Back then he was the one everyone trusted to fix what broke. Doors, fences, wiring. He was at the house the week before the fire. He used parts that should have been thrown away and told himself it would hold. He saw your friend with me that night and chose silence. Now he thinks silence will save him again. The words settled like ash. He thought of the mark cut into the doorframe, the shadow. At the post, the way the town had carried their version like a map. The caretaker had lived under that map too, hiding in its folds. He'll come back, he said. He said he would, she answered. He said if I speak, he'll speak shame. He still believes shame is stronger than truth. His hand found the letter in his pocket. He felt the vow, the promise on a friend's last breath shift from weight to purpose. Then we don't wait for him in the dark, he said. We call him into the light. The next afternoon, he went to the mill. The caretaker stood by the broken fence, mending it with string as if string could mend anything that mattered. The man looked older in daylight, the lines around his eyes cut by years of fear. When he saw the visitor, he went still, hands dropping to his sides. I won't drag you out by the collar, the visitor said. I'm asking, come to her house tonight. Bring the truth. I'll bring the letter. He could feel the words choosing him as much as he chose them. If you won't, come, I'll still read it. To her, to the town if I must. The caretaker swallowed. You think the town wants truth? They want their comfort. They want the story they can use. They can choose a better one, he said, or at least they can stop using ours. For a long breath, wind moved through the grass, carrying the damp scent of old rain. The caretaker nodded once small, as if even agreement might expose him, and muttered, at dusk. At dusk, the road to her house held more eyes than before. People pretended to look at the sky, or their door hinges, or the ground beneath their shoes. Still, their attention tugged like a tide. Inside, the room was ready. The table cleared, the small box of letters set where both could see. She stood by the window, not hiding her scar, not hiding anything. When the caretaker entered, he kept his hat in his hands, twisting it until the brim bent. He would not meet her eyes. I came, he said, as if the act might count for half the truth. Then, speak, she answered. Not for me, for yourself. He drew in a breath, but the words clogged. The visitor unfolded the letter then and placed it on the table between them. Read this line, he said, and pointed to the hand that had written with courage at the edge of fear. The caretaker bent, lips shaping the sentence that named a repair done in haste, a wire not replaced, a silence that grew like mold. When he finished, the room held its breath. I told myself it wasn't my fault, the caretaker whispered. I told myself. I didn't know, but I knew enough. And when I saw you both, I said nothing, because blame was easier on you than on me. The mark on your door, his voice failed. I thought if I scared you quiet, the town would stop sniffing. You watched the house burn, she said, calm and terrible as mercy. You watched and did nothing. I froze, he said. And I never thawed. I'm sorry. He did not reach for her. He did not ask for absolution like a coin. He only stood with the ruin he had made. Silence spread thin over the room, and in it, the visitor heard the shape of what must come next. We'll bring this to the square, he said, not to punish you. To end a lie. To end the story that has locked her in a box and kept you a prisoner, too. He looked from the caretaker to her. No more shadows, no more marks on doors. They walked to the square when the lamps were being lit. The town gathered the way. It always does when it thinks it might see something it can use later. The baker wiped his hands on his apron. The smith crossed thick arms. A group of boys, all elbows and daring, stood on a low wall. She stood in the center, not shrinking. He stood at her side. The caretaker stood facing them all, hat crushed. In his fingers, the visitor raised the letter. "This is the last thing our friend wrote," he said, voice steady enough to carry. "He asked me to keep a promise. He asked me to look past shame and toward truth. He read the lines about the fire, about the hasty fix, about guilt that can build a second house inside a person and make it their only home. Then he lowered the page and stepped aside. The caretaker spoke. He did not dress his confession in cleverness. He told them what he had done, what he had not done, and how fear had kept him from both the right thing and the hard thing. He did not ask the town to forgive. He asked the town to stop lying to itself. "You called her cursed because it kept your own doors safe," he said, voice raw. "But I was the one who cursed a house with neglect, and I was the one who let the story point away from me." Something moved through the crowd then, a small wind through wheat, shame perhaps, or the slow turn of a wheel that had been rusted. A woman who had once crossed the street to avoid the scarred woman took one step forward. The smith looked at his boots. The boys on the wall grew quiet, which might be the first miracle of any night. She spoke last. She did not make a speech. "I am not a lesson," she said. "I am a person. I carry scars and I carry strength. I will not live under someone else's fear." She looked to the caretaker. "I accept your words. Whether I forgive you is not today's work." Today? The truth stands where all can see. The square held. Then a sound began, not applause, not jeers, just the shuffle of people making a new space in their minds. It was not sudden love. It was the easing of a grip. And that was enough for the night. After, people came in ones and twos. The baker offered bread without charge, awkward and earnest. The smith said he would mend the bent hinge on her gate. None of it healed what had happened, and none of it needed to. Healing would walk at its own pace. But the first step had been made in daylight, not rumor. Days passed, and the shadow at the post did not return. The mark on the door was sanded away, the curls of soft wood falling like shed skin. The caretaker fixed the wiring in every old house at his own cost, not as penance alone, but as work he should always have done. He stopped walking the long way around the square. He stood where people could see him and did not flinch. The vow did not dissolve with the truth. It changed shape. One evening, under a sky clear as a clean plate, he stood at her threshold without the weight of fear on his back. "I kept the promise I made on his last breath," he said. "But if I ask for your hand now, it will not be because of that vow. It will be because I see you. Because love is not a rescue and marriage is not a hiding place. It is a choice made in light." He swallowed. "Will you choose me?" She did not answer right away. She walked to the shelf, touched the small box of letters, and then the ribbon on the wall with its stitched date, the day she stopped looking down. "For a long time," she said, "I thought I would always be alone. I thought choosing anyone would mean choosing the town's story. Today I learned something else. We can write our own." She turned back to him, and her smile was small and bright as a candle that has outlived the storm. "Yes, but we will build it slow. We will build it careful. And we will build it with truth." They married before the season turned, not with spectacle, but with the kind of ceremony that fits inside two hands. A few people stood with them under the old tree by the well. The caretaker came and kept to the back, eyes wet, hat in hand, not from shame but from relief. The smith brought a ring he had hammered smooth. The baker brought bread still warm. When they spoke their vows, they did not borrow words that promised perfect days. They promised to stand when storms rose. They promised to listen when fear spoke too loudly. They promised to remember the friend whose last breath had turned a vow into a door after They planted a sapling near the steps of her house, a living thing to mark a new beginning that did not erase the past. Children from the lane helped, their palms dirty, their giggles soft, as if even joy knew this ground had once held fire. When the light thinned and the first star reached for the dark, she rested her hand in his, and for the first time the road ahead did not feel like a corridor of eyes. It felt like a path. The town did not change overnight. Some people kept their distance. Some could not let go of the old story because it had made them feel safe. But others changed, and the small changes mattered. A door that had been closed cracked open. A greeting once withheld was given. A boy on the wall asked, not if scars can spread, but if a scar hurts when it rains. She told him sometimes, and that was enough learning for one day. In the quiet that followed those long months, he would sometimes return to the letter and read it again, not to reopen wounds, but to hear the voice that had asked the hardest thing. A friend can ask, honor this life, hold what I could not. He would close his eyes and thank the man who had saved her on the worst night, and who had, in dying, given them both the courage to live. Love story, vow, promise, redemption, healing. Forgiveness, the words were no longer only keywords in a tale told for others. They were tools they used to build their days. On an evening warm enough to leave the door open, he stood on the porch and watched the sapling throw a thin, brave shadow across the steps. She came to stand beside him, shoulder to shoulder. Somewhere in the distance a bell rang from the square, steady as a heartbeat. He thought of how far they had walked from the first knock to this last light. He thought of how a town can learn to trade a rumor for a truth. He thought of how marriage, chosen freely, can be both a refuge and a road. Do you ever miss the quiet of the old life? She asked, not teasing, only curious. Sometimes, he said honestly. But then I remember the silence wasn't peace. It was fear. This, he gestured to the tree, the lane, the open door, the life stitched by their hands. This is noisy in the right ways. She laughed, a sound like water over small stones, and leaned her head against his shoulder. The lantern inside. Their house swung gently, but the darkness outside did not press in anymore. It was just evening being evening. When the wind came up, it moved through the leaves with a soft voice. He heard in it the echo of the promise that had begun everything, and the answer that had finished it. Not pity, not rescue, but love with eyes open. If the town remembered anything from their story, he hoped it would be this simple thing: see people, not rumors. Keep truth near. Let scars be evidence of healing, not an excuse to look away. They went inside together, and the door, once marked by fear, closed on a home made of choice. The lantern's light steadied. The sapling outside held its own against the night. And in the small, honest silence, the vow that had once felt like chains settled into what it had always wanted to be: a promise kept and a life begun.